Okay, welcome to tonight's Teen Talk series. Tonight is all about self-harm. We have Crystal Gilbertson with us tonight. She is an FSL at the high school here in Stettler at William E. Hay. She's been there for about 5.5 years in her role as as one of the family school liaison workers for the high school and the secondary schools, 7 to 12. And before that, she was about 9.5 years. She worked in Grand Prairie for the Center for Suicide Prevention. And she's also an assist trainer. She's been an assist trainer, which is suicide intervention trainer for about 7 years. So Crystal is going to give us a little bit of an intro on self-harm and what we can do if we are concerned about one of our own children or a student that we know. Go ahead, Crystal.
Okay, thank you. I'll go through self-harm, kind of what it is and kind of those warning signs to look out for, and then what can we actually do to help our youth. So what is self-harm? It's the intentional self-inflicted damage to the body with the intent of mild to moderate injury. That's kind of the main definition of it. So this means that it's a purposeful behavior. It's not accident, so if we're accident prone and we're tripping over things and getting some bruises, it's not that. It is intentional and it's meant to cause pain or injury. So it's also then not tattoos or piercings, those types of behaviors where it's a social expression, and it's not necessarily about the pain for that. So often what we see is cutting. That's the number one. About 70% of the individuals that self-injure is cutting. And then we have hitting, biting, scratching, sometimes inserting pins or other things under the skin to kind of damage. Damaging fingernails is one, but it's not biting and like that usual, when we say we're a nail biter, that kind of nervous habit. It's not necessarily that. It can be cutting the nails too short, again, to inflict pain, even digging under the fingernails, kind of how we clean them, but yet they end up bleeding and they're really purposely trying to bleed. Or even when we have really short fingernails, because we chew them, it's poking at the nail bed to feel the pain. And then scratching, the self-breaking of bones sometimes happens, as well as then agitating wounds. So scab picking, or pushing into damaged tissue just to try and create more pain and damage. So why should we be concerned about self-harm? Is because about 15% of youth have self-harmed in some way, or once, few times, or multiple times that they are actively self-harming. So about 15% of youth and about 5% of adults actually self-harm. Most self-harming actually starts about age 12 to 15. So that's right when we're the most concerned with youth being stressed out and body changes, life changes. And that's often when self-injury can begin to occur for some individuals. So that's kind of the piece of like the what. I do want to clarify, if Penny, go to the next slide, because often when we're thinking about self-harming or we see someone that's self-harming, we question as to whether this is suicide and suicide behaviors. So self-harm and suicide behaviors are different. And this piece is actually from the Center for Suicide Prevention down in Calgary. And this idea that you can have self-harm behavior, only self-harm behavior, and you can have only suicide ideation and behavior, or you can have both. So this chart's really about the both. So frequency, self-harm is often frequent. Suicide attempts or suicide behavior happens less frequently in those individuals that have both. And then method, often different, because self-harm behavior is usually leading to minor or moderate damage. Cutting is, of course, one that can be either, but there's more ways that for suicide attempts that are more damaging and more likely to end in death. So again, the severity self-harm is less damage, and usually the suicide behavior is meant to be lethal. And the purpose, so here, done to avoid suicidal impulses, that is for an individual that has both self-harm and suicidal ideation. But it's done for coping when an individual is doing self-harm behaviors without suicidal ideation. So it's more about coping. A suicide attempt is usually done with the intent to die or the possibility of death. There's kind of that question as to whether the action they do could result in death, and they're almost leaving it to the fate for suicide behavior. So self-harm does not necessarily mean suicidal ideation. That's kind of, we see a cut or we see a scratch and we will react and we will panic and think, is my child trying to kill themselves? And so it's not necessarily that, but if you flip to the next slide, there is this idea that it's not suicide, but it can become suicide. So self-harm is meant for, or it's kind of that mild harm with either no or low intent to die. However, depending on their use of method for self-harm, it can end in an unintentional suicide. Whether they cut too deep or if they use asphyxiation, they accidentally die because the release just doesn't work and they cut off all air supply. So an unintentional dying can happen. The other thing too is this idea of, we call it habituation of the act. So those are big words for essentially saying we get more comfortable with something. And so if we are self-harming and we are cutting for purpose of self-harm, we can feel more comfortable with that idea of cutting, and the act of cutting becomes more comfortable. So it can reduce the fears of cutting. And often when individuals that I've talked to about suicide, part of their, it's actually a protective factor, but part of their response in I'm thinking about suicide is also, but I'm too scared or I'm too chicken. That's actually protective. That's part of the body or part of the mind that's saying, no, actually, we want to live. Like, we're going to say it's too scary because we actually want to live. But if we've been cutting or other behaviors for self-harm, we kind of take away that scared factor and just say, oh, well, it's what I've been doing, but it's just a little deeper cut. So it can actually increase the risk of dying by suicide if suicidal ideation is present with that self-harm behavior. And another thing to consider is that at times the same reasons that someone may choose to self-harm, those can lead to the same thoughts of suicidal ideation, which is the why self-harm. And so there's lots of reasons that someone will choose to injure themselves. There's not a specific list of this is exactly, you know, if you've broken up with your boyfriend, you're going to start self-harming, or if you break up with your boyfriend, you're going to start thinking about suicide. But depending on the individual, that could be something that happens. Or if we get into a huge fight with parents or parents divorce, that could be, I can't cope with this, and therefore I'm turning to self-harm or to suicidal ideation. So we do have to kind of keep that in mind, that if a youth is struggling and they're choosing to self-harm, there is a possibility that suicide can be part of that, and we need to explore it. So why self-harm? It's a coping mechanism and meant for self-regulation. Okay, so we're feeling too big of feelings, excuse me, and we cut for that release or that coping, or that distraction, right? So the pain of the emotional pain is too much, but a physical pain is more manageable. And I can take care of a physical pain, but I can't take care of that emotional pain. So that may be a way of handling what's going on. Also, self-punishment can be a piece. This is also in individuals that have negative body image, which does have an increased risk for self-harm. That self-punishment piece could be punishing their body, or trying to change it to a way that looks how they really want it to look. So negative body image can increase that risk factor. A couple others that may increase risk factors to just keep in the back of your mind when you're concerned about either your child or another child that you know, is some of those past experiences that they've had, and trauma, childhood illness, abuse, even neglect, negative body image, loss of a parent, and family substance abuse can increase the risk. Does not mean that because we've lost a parent or because we've experienced abuse that we are going to self-harm. It's just a risk factor that has been shown in research that it is more common for individuals that have self-harmed to have experienced some of these traumatic abuses in their life. So how do we know that someone is self-harming? So these warning signs, often we'll see it on the skin. So the most frequent places that injury occurs is the hands, arms, thighs, and stomach. So if we see kind of frequent damage to that part, whether it's burn, they're like, oh, I just burnt my wrist while I was cooking, but they also just burnt their wrist, was the story they gave you 5 nights ago. It's that repetitive injury to those areas, or even scarring or just cuts. The cat scratched me is another one that is a common excuse that we might give. Or we just start hiding those areas of the body because we don't actually want people to see the wounds that we are inflicting upon ourselves. So stopping going swimming, not wanting to change for gym anymore, wearing long sleeves or hoodies. It's 40 degrees outside and now they're wearing hoodies, even though that wasn't their usual behavior 2 months ago or last summer. It's trying to hide those injuries because we don't want them seen. Or finding tools to cut or burn. Okay, so they're going through safety blades for their razor. You're finding lighters in all their bags or backpacks, or they're leaving them everywhere. That could be a possibility. Using up bandages. So if all of a sudden all your band-aids are gone, or finding bloody tissue or bandage in the garbage, even buried in the garbage sometimes. So those are some of those physical warning signs. You'll also potentially see change in mood or behavior because something has been going on that is causing or bringing the self-harm behavior on. So they're not hanging out with friends anymore. They're getting more frustrated. They're lashing out. Maybe they're pulling away from talking to their parents. And sometimes they'll be communicating those struggles. They'll be like, oh, I'm so pissed off, or I'm so frustrated with things, or nothing's going right for me. where we just notice a change in their behavior. And it could even be that positive way, which is really hard, where then all of a sudden they're the perfect child and they're trying to put everything away and do everything that they're told to, because they don't want to raise suspicion and have parents start kind of digging in as to how they've been doing or what's going on, or noticing some of those struggles. So sometimes we do put on that front. So those are some of the warning signs to look for. So then what can we do? Okay. So this is where, Penny, if you want to go to the next slide. The first thing we want to do is panic, right? We want to freak out because we're scared, we're worried, we're confused. We can even be mad, right? We're mad that our kid is, pulling away or choosing to do something that we see as unhealthy or a major problem. And they might see it that way too. But in that moment, that's what they're kind of trying to do to handle what's going on for them. So don't panic. Try not to panic. Take a few deep breaths and prepare yourself, right? You don't have to run in guns a-blazing. We just need to try and keep a level head and explore what's kind of going on. Okay. Because if you panic, they're going to panic. Usually when we're starting to get upset, we don't say stuff that we really wanted to say. So we really should try and be prepared. So try not to panic. Okay. I know we're going to be worried that, even with the idea of like, is suicide involved? We want to respond, but we don't want to try and freak out about it. Okay. So one of the things to do is definitely be discreet and maintain confidentiality. Okay. So this is where then we need to have a private conversation with our child. And what we talk about with them doesn't necessarily need to become everybody's business. So potentially we don't need to tell their soccer coach what's going on, or we don't need to tell great Aunt Fanny everything that's happening as well. But that's not to say that we should completely keep it a secret. But we do need to be respectful that this is a hard thing for the youth to be going through. And they do want privacy and they want to feel like they're being respected around it. So do try and have that private conversation with them to bring forward your concerns. So don't dismiss or ignore your concerns. That's another thing where we're just like, oh, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't see it. Maybe we're too scared to have that conversation, because I assure you, it can be a scary conversation, right? This is our child that we're talking about. And so we have a vested interest for them to be the best human being that they can be. And to think that that might not be the case in this moment is really scary and frustrating as a parent or an adult in their life. So sometimes we're just like, oh, it's just a phase, or they're just experimenting. Let's just, pretend like everything's going okay. Try not to do that, and really bring forward your concerns to your youth, because it does matter. And the fact that you notice and you're bringing it forward does matter for them, that you care and you want to be there, and you want to help. Okay. So ask questions, be curious and open. Okay. That's where we need to maintain that calm, because we don't want to feel like we're yelling at them or giving them trouble. We just want to get some of the facts. So we want to ask, like, hey, I noticed that there seems to be frequent cuts on your arms. What's going on? Right. And then listen. So that's kind of sometimes the hard part too, is because when we listen, we might hear some stuff that is really hard to hear. right? We don't want to hear that our babies are struggling. So we do need to just listen for the information that they're going to provide you, the facts, finding out the frequency of the cutting or the burning, whatever behavior they're doing, some of that frequency piece, even some of the triggers, what's going on for them, and really just kind of hear what's going on. So don't dismiss or diminish what they tell you, because if we just say, oh, it's just a phase, you'll grow out of it, or suck it up, it's not that hard, this is teenage life, that doesn't help them solve what's going on for them, because in their mind in that moment, it is a huge thing that they're struggling with. And I know we've all been through the teen years and experienced it. I mean, we came out alive. We survived teenage years, and for some it's very, very tough, and for others it feels quite easy, and we're like, yeah, it's not so bad. But we never know what each individual struggles are. So we do have to take value in what our youth is telling us, that it's a real experience for them. And as a teenager, we feel deeply. We have a huge, huge emotional roller coaster, and they feel it all. And so to them, it is a huge deal. And to them, this is their life up to this point. And they don't necessarily see how it's going to potentially be easier as an adult, or harder as an adult, right? And so we just need to be present in that moment with them and just acknowledge that it's tough for them. So don't shame them is another piece. And I know that's also can be hard for some people, but just validate that it's a tough situation that they're in and that you're there to help them, which is helping them to change what they can change, and to increase some of that safety piece. So, if they have so much on their plate that they're just not coping, okay, help them change that. Maybe they take less classes, or they get rid of an extracurricular activity for the time being, or they increase some coping strategies and some relaxation. Increasing safety could include removing what they use to self-injure, or it could just be making that safety plan of safe injury, or I know that sounds really weird, but that idea of that they may still self-harm even while they're trying to change things, and then it's how can we make sure that they're receiving proper medical care for the injury if need be, or that they're maybe doing something less damaging. And we will do substitution of behaviors. So sometimes taking away and saying, okay, if they're cutting, removing all objects that they could use to cut is nearly impossible, because you can find something. You could break a CD. I guess no one uses CDs anymore, but you can break anything to injure. You can use a butter knife, you can use a fork, you can use your own fingernail to scratch. So sometimes we can't remove all of that. And so we have to increase that safety of how do we delay or prevent the injury altogether. And that really is then about building up coping strategies, because self-injury is usually a coping strategy, right? So building up healthy coping strategies, helping them get more connected with some of those, and having open communication with them. Both of that, healthy coping strategies and open communication between parent and child, is also kind of a protective factor with self-injury. So that could be something that if we have better coping skills, if we know how to handle our frustrations, we may be less likely to turn to self-injury behavior. So if your child is not currently injuring, that may be something that if you're worried about it coming, because they're hitting those teen years, is really building up those coping strategies now, rather as a preventative rather than a defensive tactic. Um, Something to consider too is, are you the best adult in their life to have that conversation? Because sometimes you might not be. So if they see you as the bad parent, you're always in conflict, they have a better relationship with the other parent in their life or even grandparent, could that be someone that you bring those concerns to so that you can help them have that conversation? Because it would be more receptive, right? If it just doesn't feel like it will go over well, if it's coming from you, who could have that conversation? So a trusted family member, or a school staff, a community support agency, someone else that's also in this youth's life, you could bring your concerns to them and have them have that conversation. But I think it is really helpful to still share your concern and worry with your youth so that they know that they're being seen and that you care. And usually they're more worried about the conversation with you, because they see it as mad. That's when I have conversations with youth about, hey, we need to tell your parent about, like, say, suicidal ideation. They're usually worried that, well, parents are going to be mad. They're going to yell at me. And so that's that idea of fear and being scared comes out as being mad. And so when we react, it comes out as anger, but it's not meant to be anger. And we need to really identify it and label it as, I'm really scared and I'm panicking because I care and I don't know what to do. And being able to share some of that emotions with your youth can help them label their emotions as well. And then seek support for you and for them. Because it can be very tough, having a youth that's struggling, and turning to self-harm or suicide ideation. It's beneficial for you to have some support and resources, and this can be professional or more informal, where it's one of your closest friends that, again, can keep that kind of confidentiality piece and isn't going to share all of it, or kind of get in the middle of it. So they can be your support. And then for your youth, there's also then that opportunity of what resources can we get you attached to. So I know in this slideshow, there's a lot of different resources that you can access. There's like 5 pages of it, I believe, is what's been kind of put together. So we do have a lot. So this kids mental health, and the kids help phone are ones that your youth can kind of turn to. They also have parent support and information. More that's listed here has some lesson for parents on self-harm on their website. They call it non-suicidal self-injury. So that's another term you might hear when you're trying to search and really inform yourself of what self-harm is non-suicidal self-injury, as well as more has suicidal ideation as well. And then, of course, the suicide prevention. So Center for Suicide Prevention is in Calgary. The Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention. These are all really good resources. The Distress Center, and the crisis lines that are available and are anonymous can be very helpful to just express some of those frustrations and find some resources. And 211 and the mental health helpline can be accesses. So those are all available to you. Seeking support will likely also include mental health. So accessing the mental health youth services would likely be beneficial. Talking with your doctor could be a gatekeeper in some of that resources, or assessing some of those underlying issues that might be going on. Like maybe there's some anxiety or depression that could be happening that can also be addressed by the doctor. But so mental health, and then the school, depending on what school your child goes to, they will likely have a family school liaison worker there at least once a week. All of Clearview schools do. So having the family school liaison worker could be a resource to dig into what's going on and what kind of coping strategies and changes needs to happen in that youth's life so that they really can be the healthy, happy, functioning human being that we all want them to be. So they can help with those skills. And then there's also a lot of like community agencies and community counselors that can be accessed to help provide support around developing skills to cope and communicate with kind of those emotions and what's going on so that self-harm doesn't have to be a part of their life. So I do believe that is everything that I wanted to make sure I said. So I guess this is the time for the Q&A of what didn't get covered or anything that needs to get clarified. So I will turn that over to that.
I will also stop the recording in case there are questions. So I'll just stop that first.